A veteran was left for dead. His German shepherd found a secret buried for 100 years. What secret could have remained hidden for an entire century? And how could a German shepherd uncover something that time had forgotten? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. We are grateful to have you here with us for another unforgettable story filled with mystery, loyalty, and hope. If you enjoy emotional journeys and inspiring moments, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being part of this community and for supporting every story we share. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from in the world, and what time is it where you are right now? Now let us begin the story. Everyone thought his story was over, but one loyal heart refused to walk away. Daniel Whitmore had spent years learning how to live with silence. After leaving the military, the former soldier moved through each day with a quiet discipline that few people understood. The small house at the edge of the countryside was supposed to be a place where he could finally find peace. No crowds, no questions, no reminders of everything he had left behind. Just open fields, fresh air, and a chance to begin again. But life had a different plan waiting for him. Beside him was Atlas, his German shepherd, the one companion who never questioned Daniel's past and never asked him to explain the weight he carried. The dog simply stayed. Every morning, Atlas walked beside Daniel through the property, following familiar paths beneath tall trees and across the quiet land surrounding their home. Their days were simple, but there was comfort in that simplicity. Daniel believed he had already lost everything that mattered. He never expected the forgotten piece of history waiting nearby to change his life forever. It began on a cold autumn morning when the sky was covered with soft gray clouds and a gentle wind moved through the trees. Daniel noticed Atlas standing near an old section of land behind the house. The German shepherd was not afraid. He was simply focused, looking toward a place Daniel had walked past countless times before. "What did you find, boy?" Daniel whispered. Atlas looked back at him for a moment, then returned his attention to the ground. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no sound, no warning, no sign that something important was about to happen. Just a loyal dog noticing something unusual and a man willing to stop and listen. Daniel walked closer and studied the area. The ground looked ordinary, covered with leaves and forgotten by time. Yet something about Atlas's behavior made him curious. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a small spark of interest. Not excitement, not ambition, something quieter. A feeling that perhaps life still had a few unexpected chapters left. He spent the afternoon carefully examining the area, searching for any explanation. He found no obvious answer, but he noticed small details that seemed out of place. Old markings on weathered wood, a piece of metal partially hidden beneath the soil, signs that someone had once cared about this place long ago. That evening, Daniel sat on the porch while Atlas rested beside him. The sun disappeared behind the hills, painting the sky with warm colors. Daniel looked at his companion and smiled softly. "You always seem to know when something matters." Atlas simply lifted his head and looked toward the quiet land again. Neither of them knew what waited beneath the surface. Neither of them knew that a secret forgotten for generations was about to return. For now, there was only a man, a dog, and a feeling that their journey was just beginning. Some discoveries begin with maps and plans. Others begin with trust, patience, and a faithful companion who refuses to leave your side. After that quiet autumn evening, Daniel Whitmore could not stop thinking about the place where Atlas had been standing. The moment was small, almost ordinary, but something about it stayed with him. For years, Daniel had learned to ignore curiosity. He had convinced himself that a peaceful life meant asking fewer questions and expecting fewer surprises. Yet Atlas had reminded him that sometimes the world still had something waiting to be discovered. The next morning, Daniel returned to the old section of land. With a shovel, a flashlight, and a notebook, Atlas followed closely, walking through the fallen leaves with the same calm focus he had shown the day before. The air was cool, and the scent of pine trees filled the quiet morning. Daniel carefully examined the unusual markings he had noticed earlier. They were not random scratches. They appeared to be placed there with purpose, as if someone long ago wanted a future visitor to notice them. Near an old wooden structure covered by years of weather, Daniel found another small clue. A piece of metal with faded lettering rested beneath the soil. He gently cleaned it and looked closer. The words were difficult to read, but they carried the feeling of a forgotten story. Atlas sat beside him, watching patiently. "You brought me here for a reason, did you not?" Daniel said softly. The dog looked up at him, then back toward the land. That simple moment made Daniel smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected to something beyond his own memories. He spent the following days researching the area around his property. He visited local records, searched through old maps, and spoke with people who had lived nearby for decades. Most knew little about the land's history. They only remembered that an old family once lived there many years ago before disappearing from the area. The more Daniel searched, the more questions appeared. There were stories of a forgotten property line, old family belongings, and a mysterious event that caused some records to vanish over time. Nothing was confirmed, but every small discovery seemed to point towards something hidden beneath the surface of history. Meanwhile, Atlas continued returning to the same location each morning. The German shepherd never rushed or acted strangely. He simply waited for Daniel to follow. That patience was what made the connection feel different. Atlas was not searching for something for himself. He was guiding the person who trusted him. One evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by old papers and handwritten notes. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of Atlas resting nearby. Daniel looked at everything he had collected and realized something unexpected. He was no longer searching because he wanted answers for himself. He wanted to understand the story of the people who had left these signs behind. Somewhere in the past, someone had tried to protect a memory. Someone had hidden something important, hoping that one day the right person would find it. The following morning, Daniel and Atlas returned to the forgotten area once again. This time, Daniel brought a camera and more careful tools to document anything they discovered. The sunlight moved through the trees as Atlas stopped near the old wooden structure and looked toward a section of ground that seemed untouched by time. Daniel slowly walked closer. Beneath the leaves, he noticed a shape that did not belong. It was another piece of the past waiting to be uncovered. And as he reached down to clear away the leaves, Daniel realized that Atlas had not found a place. He had found the beginning of a story. The small discovery beneath the old wooden structure changed the way Daniel Whitmore looked at the land around his home. What he first believed was only a forgotten piece of metal turned out to be something much more meaningful. As he carefully cleared away the leaves and soil, Daniel uncovered an old container protected beneath the ground. It was not large, and it carried the marks of many years, but the way it had been placed there suggested that someone wanted it to survive the passage of time. Atlas stood quietly beside him, watching with the same patience that had guided Daniel from the beginning. The former soldier carefully brought the container back to the house and placed it on the kitchen table. He did not rush to open it. After everything he had learned about the land, he understood that some discoveries deserved respect. The following morning, with sunlight filling the room, Daniel carefully examined the outside of the container. There were faded symbols, old handwriting, and a date that immediately caught his attention. The markings showed that the item had been hidden more than 100 years earlier. Daniel felt a strange connection to the person who had placed it there. Someone had taken the time to protect whatever was inside, believing that someday another person might find it. Inside the container, Daniel discovered a collection of carefully preserved letters, photographs, and handwritten records. The pages were fragile, but the words remained clear enough to reveal pieces of a forgotten family history. The letters spoke about a small community that once existed near the property. They described dreams, promises, and moments shared between people whose names had slowly disappeared from local memory. Daniel read every page with care. He was not searching for wealth or recognition. He was trying to understand the lives behind the names. Atlas rested beside him as the hours passed, occasionally lifting his head as if he also understood the importance of the moment. The discovery raised even more questions. Why had these memories been hidden? Who had placed them there? And why had no one returned to recover them? Daniel began another search through local archives and historical records. He found references to a family that had once owned a large portion of the surrounding land. They were known for helping neighbors and preserving stories from the community. However, over the decades, their connection to the area had faded. Their records became incomplete, and their story was almost forgotten. As Daniel continued researching, he discovered a name that appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. It belonged to a person who had written about protecting something valuable, not because of its price, but because of what it represented. The word stayed with Daniel long after he finished reading. He realized the hidden collection was never meant to be found by someone looking only for treasure. It was meant to be found by someone willing to listen. That evening, Daniel walked outside with Atlas as the sun lowered behind the hills. The quiet fields looked the same as they always had, but everything felt different now. The land was no longer just a place where he lived. It was a place carrying memories from people who had come before him. Atlas looked toward the old area once again, but this time Daniel understood. The German shepherd had not discovered a secret because he was chasing something hidden. He had simply followed a feeling, leading Daniel toward a story that had been waiting for the right moment to return. And as Daniel held the old letters in his hands, he knew their journey had only reached the beginning of something much greater. The old letters found inside the forgotten container opened a door to a past that had been waiting quietly for more than 100 years. Daniel Whitmore spent the following days carefully studying every page, trying to understand the people behind the handwriting. The words were not just records of events. They were pieces of real lives, filled with hopes, promises, and moments that someone had believed were worth protecting. Atlas remained close throughout the process, resting near Daniel's chair as the veteran read through each document. The German shepherd had started this journey by noticing something unusual, but Daniel now understood that the discovery was much bigger than the place where it was found. It was about the people whose voices had been almost forgotten. One letter in particular caught Daniel's attention. It described a hidden room beneath an older structure that once stood on the property. The writer mentioned that important family belongings had been placed there during a difficult time, not because they were valuable, but because they carried memories that should never disappear. Daniel read the sentence several times. He realized there was another layer to the mystery. The container was not the end of the story. It was a sign pointing toward something deeper. The next morning, Daniel returned to the old area with Atlas by his side. The weather was calm, and a soft breeze moved through the trees surrounding the property. The veteran carefully compared the information from the letters with the land around him. The descriptions were old, but certain details still matched. A large tree mentioned in the documents was still standing. A stone marker described in one of the letters remained near the edge of the property. Every small discovery connected the present to the past. Atlas walked slowly beside Daniel, occasionally stopping as if following a familiar path. Daniel smiled as he watched him. "You have been trying to show me this all along, haven't you?" he said quietly. The dog looked back at him with calm eyes before continuing forward. Near the stone marker, Daniel found another unusual detail. A section of the ground looked different from the surrounding area. It was not obvious, and someone walking by might have missed it completely. But after reading the old documents, Daniel knew what he was looking for. He carefully examined the area and found signs that something had once been placed there. He did not rush. He documented everything and made sure he respected the history connected to the land. As evening approached, Daniel returned home with more questions than answers. He placed the letters and photographs on the table and looked at them again. The mystery was becoming clearer, but it also carried more responsibility. These were not simply forgotten objects. They were pieces of someone's life. Someone had trusted that a future person would understand their importance. Daniel thought about his own journey. For years, he had believed that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But now he was discovering that sometimes the past returns for a reason. Sometimes forgotten stories find the people who are ready to listen. That night, Atlas rested beside the fireplace while Daniel continued reading by the warm light. Outside, the old property remained quiet beneath the stars. Somewhere beneath that land was another piece of the story, waiting patiently like the letters before it. Daniel no longer wondered if there was something worth finding. He already knew there was. The only question left was what the next discovery would reveal. And with Atlas beside him, he was ready to follow the path that history had placed in front of them. The morning after Daniel Whitmore discovered the signs beneath the old stone marker, the forgotten property felt different. The land was still quiet. The trees still moved gently with the wind, and the small house still carried the same peaceful feeling it always had. But Daniel no longer saw it as an ordinary place. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. Every old mark seemed to carry a message from someone who had hoped their story would one day be remembered. Atlas followed Daniel outside as they returned to the area described in the letters. The German shepherd moved slowly, staying close to his companion. He was not searching with excitement. He was simply there, as he had always been, reminding Daniel that he did not have to face the mystery alone. Using the information from the old documents, Daniel carefully examined the area around the marker. After spending hours comparing details, he noticed a small difference in the ground that matched the description written more than a century earlier. It was a place intentionally overlooked by time. With patience and respect, Daniel uncovered a hidden wooden door beneath the earth. The discovery did not feel like finding something that belonged to him. It felt like opening a chapter of someone else's life. Daniel carefully documented everything before looking inside. The space below was small, but it had been preserved remarkably well. Inside were several carefully wrapped items, old books, and a collection of personal belongings that had remained untouched for generations. Among them was a journal with a faded leather cover. Daniel held it gently, understanding that this was not just an old object. It was a voice from the past. That evening, he sat near the fireplace and began reading the journal. The pages revealed the story of a family that had lived on the property many years earlier. They wrote about their dreams, their struggles, and their hope that future generations would remember the values they believed in. The journal explained that certain possessions had been protected because they represented family connections, not material wealth. Daniel paused after reading those words. They reminded him of everything he had experienced since arriving at the cottage. The discovery was never truly about what was hidden underground. It was about what those hidden things meant. Over the next several days, Daniel continued studying the journal and the items found inside the hidden room. He found references to relatives who had moved away and lost contact with one another over time. Some names appeared in old records, but the connections between them had become unclear. Daniel realized that the mystery was no longer only about the past. It was also about finding the people connected to it in the present. Atlas often rested beside Daniel while he worked through the documents. Sometimes the dog would lift his head when Daniel became lost in thought, as if reminding him to keep going. Their bond had grown stronger through every discovery. Daniel had spent years believing that his life was defined by what he had lost. But this journey was teaching him something different. Maybe life was not only about what disappeared. Maybe it was also about the unexpected things that returned. As the days passed, Daniel began searching through public records and historical archives to learn more about the family connected to the journal. Each answer brought new questions, but he welcomed them. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something meaningful. The old cottage was no longer just a place where he lived. It had become a bridge between generations, connecting people who had been separated by time. And beside him, Atlas remained faithful, quietly walking the path that had brought them both toward a secret that was never meant to stay hidden forever. The discovery inside the hidden room changed the way Daniel Whitmore approached the mystery. Before, he had been searching for answers because he wanted to understand what Atlas had found. Now, he realized the story belonged to people who had lived long before him. The journal, the letters, and the carefully preserved belongings were pieces of a history that deserved to be treated with care. Daniel spent each morning organizing the documents and comparing the names written inside with public records. Atlas stayed nearby, resting on the wooden floor of the cottage while Daniel worked. The German Shepherd had become a quiet reminder of patience, always present during the long hours of research. As Daniel continued looking through historical archives, he discovered more information about the family connected to the old property. Their name appeared in several local records, but the details were incomplete. The family had once been known for their generosity and their connection to the surrounding community. They had built a life on the land, created memories inside the cottage, and left behind a collection of personal items that were meant to preserve their story. One afternoon, Daniel found a record that changed everything. It showed that some members of the family had moved across different states many decades earlier. Over time, communication between relatives became difficult, and the connection between generations slowly faded. The people who inherited the memories were scattered, and the story of the cottage became almost forgotten. Daniel sat quietly after reading the record. He thought about how easily important moments could disappear when no one remained to tell them. He looked at Atlas resting beside him and smiled. The dog had not simply discovered a hidden place. He had helped bring a forgotten family story back into the world. Daniel decided that the next step was clear. He needed help from people who understood history and preservation. He contacted a local historian named Margaret Ellis, who had spent years researching old properties and family records in the region. When Margaret arrived at the cottage, she immediately understood that the discovery was unusual. She carefully examined the journal, the photographs, and the documents that Daniel had collected. She did not focus on the possible value of the items. Instead, she focused on the people behind them. "These are memories," she said softly, "not just objects." Those words stayed with Daniel. He had spent much of his life believing that things lost could never be recovered. But now he was seeing something different. Sometimes what disappears is not gone forever. Sometimes it only needs someone willing to search. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Margaret worked together to organize the information. They traced family names, reviewed old records, and searched for descendants who might still be connected to the story. Every discovery brought them closer to understanding the full picture. The cottage slowly became a place where history was being rebuilt piece by piece. Neighbors began visiting to learn about the story that had been hidden in their own community for so many years. Many were surprised that such an important piece of local history had remained unnoticed for so long. Daniel never expected attention or recognition. He simply wanted to make sure the story was handled correctly. In the evenings, he often sat outside with Atlas and watched the sunset over the property. The same land that once felt empty now felt full of meaning. Daniel thought about the journey that brought him there. He had arrived hoping to find a quiet place to start over. Instead, he found a responsibility, a connection, and a reason to keep moving forward. Atlas rested beside him, calm and loyal as always. The German shepherd had found the first clue, but Daniel understood that the true discovery was something much deeper. It was the reminder that forgotten stories still matter. And sometimes the smallest sign of loyalty can lead to something that changes many lives. The search for the family connected to the forgotten cottage continued, and Daniel Whitmore began to understand that every name in the old records represented a person who had once mattered. The documents were no longer just pieces of history. They were reminders that every life leaves behind something worth remembering. With Margaret Ellis helping him organize the information, Daniel slowly uncovered more details about the family who had lived on the property generations earlier. Their story was not one of great wealth or fame. It was a story about ordinary people who valued family, kindness, and the memories they created together. Atlas remained beside Daniel through every step of the process. The German shepherd had become part of the journey in a way Daniel never expected. He was not simply the dog who discovered the first clue. He was the companion who stayed through every unanswered question and every quiet moment of reflection. One morning, Margaret arrived at the cottage with new information. After weeks of searching through historical records, she had located several possible descendants connected to the family from the journal. They lived in different parts of the United States, and many had never known that their relatives had left behind such an important piece of history. Daniel listened carefully as Margaret explained the findings. He felt a responsibility that was difficult to describe. The hidden items could have changed his life financially, but he knew their true value came from the stories they carried. "This belongs to the people who lost these memories," Daniel said quietly. Margaret nodded. She had met many people during her years studying history, but she understood that Daniel's choice was different. He was not looking for recognition. He was trying to restore something that time had taken away. Over the next several weeks, Daniel helped contact the descendants connected to the old records. Each conversation revealed another small piece of the past. Some remembered stories told by grandparents. Others had old photographs with familiar places in the background, but never knew where those places were located. When they learned about the cottage, many were surprised that the home still stood. For some, it was the first opportunity to see where their family history began. The first visitors arrived on a peaceful spring afternoon. Daniel watched as they walked through the cottage, holding old photographs and comparing them with the rooms around them. The emotions were quiet but powerful. A doorway from a picture taken decades ago was still there. A window mentioned in a letter still looked out toward the same fields. The past and present seemed to exist together in that moment. Atlas walked slowly through the room, greeting each visitor with gentle curiosity. Everyone noticed the German shepherd who had started the journey. They understood that without his unusual attention to that forgotten area, many of these memories might have remained hidden forever. Daniel stood near the fireplace and watched the families reconnect with a place they thought they had lost. He thought about his own life and how different everything had become. When he first arrived at the cottage, he believed he was searching for a quiet place to disappear from the world. Instead, he found a reason to become part of something larger than himself. The discovery had changed him. It reminded him that purpose could return at unexpected moments. That evening, after the visitors left, Daniel sat outside with Atlas beside him. The sky slowly turned orange above the trees, and the cottage stood peacefully behind them. "You found something important, old friend," Daniel whispered. Atlas rested his head near Daniel's hand, calm as always. The secret beneath the ground had connected people across a century, but the bond between a veteran and his German shepherd had revealed something even more meaningful. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries are not the things hidden away for years. They are the connections waiting to bring people back together. The days after the family reunion at the cottage brought a new sense of peace to Daniel Whitmore. The old house that once felt forgotten now carried the warmth of people reconnecting with memories they thought were lost forever. Every room held a story, every photograph held a face from another time, and every letter reminded everyone that the past was never truly gone. It had only been waiting for someone to listen. Daniel continued working with Margaret Ellis to preserve the documents and belongings discovered beneath the property. They carefully organized the collection, making sure every item was recorded and protected. The purpose was not to display a fortune or create attention. It was to honor the people who had trusted that their memories would survive. Atlas remained a familiar presence throughout the process. The German shepherd often rested near Daniel while visitors walked through the cottage, quietly observing the emotions around him. The dog seemed to understand that this place had changed. It was no longer only Daniel's home. It had become a place where families could reconnect with a part of themselves. As more descendants learned about the discovery, stories began arriving from different parts of the country. Some shared photographs that matched the images found inside the cottage. Others shared memories passed down from grandparents who had spoken about the old family property many years before. Each new piece added another layer to the story. Daniel listened carefully to every person who reached out. He understood that history was not only found in books or museums. Sometimes it lived inside family stories, old photographs, and the quiet places people stopped visiting. One afternoon, a descendant named Thomas arrived at the cottage carrying a small box of personal belongings from his family. Inside were handwritten notes and photographs that connected directly with the journal Daniel had discovered. As Thomas looked through the rooms, he became emotional seeing a place he had only known through stories. He stood near the fireplace and compared it with a photograph taken generations earlier. The moment was simple, but it carried the weight of many years. Daniel watched quietly and felt grateful that he had been able to help bring that connection back. Later that evening, Daniel walked through the property with Atlas. The fields looked peaceful beneath the fading sunlight. The same land that once seemed empty now felt alive with memories and meaning. Daniel thought about the first day he arrived. He had believed the cottage would be a place where he could stay away from the world. Instead, it became the place where he found a reason to open himself to it again. Atlas walked beside him, moving slowly but confidently. The German shepherd had never searched for attention. He had never needed recognition. He simply followed his instincts and stayed loyal to the person who needed him most. Daniel realized that was the greatest lesson Atlas had taught him. Sometimes guidance does not come through words. Sometimes it comes through quiet actions and a companion who refuses to leave your side. As the seasons changed, the cottage became known throughout the community as a place of remembrance. People visited to learn about the history preserved there and to understand the importance of protecting stories from the past. Daniel never considered himself the owner of the discovery. He saw himself as the person who had been given the responsibility to protect it. One evening, as snow began to cover the fields, Daniel sat beside the fireplace with Atlas resting nearby. He looked around the room filled with photographs, letters, and memories that had returned home. The hidden secret beneath the property had connected people separated by generations. But the greatest discovery was not what had been buried underground. It was the reminder that loyalty, kindness, and trust could bring forgotten things back into the light. Years after the discovery that changed the forgotten cottage forever, Daniel Whitmore still walked the same quiet paths with Atlas by his side. The seasons had changed many times, but the meaning of that first moment remained the same. A loyal German shepherd had noticed something that everyone else had overlooked, and a forgotten piece of history had finally found its way back into the light. The cottage was no longer a place hidden from the world. It had become a reminder that every life leaves behind a story worth protecting. Daniel often welcomed visitors who came to learn about the history preserved inside the old home. He showed them the journals, the photographs, and the letters that had connected families separated by time. He never spoke about the discovery as something that belonged to him. He always described it as something he was trusted to protect. That simple belief was what made the cottage different. It was not a monument to wealth. It was a place where people remembered the importance of family, kindness, and keeping promises. Atlas grew older with each passing year, but his spirit remained unchanged. The German shepherd still followed Daniel through the property, still rested near the fireplace, and still watched the world with the same calm attention he had shown from the beginning. Daniel sometimes looked at him and remembered the first morning when Atlas stopped near the forgotten area behind the house. At the time, it seemed like a small moment. Now, Daniel understood that small moments could carry the greatest meaning. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, Daniel sat outside with Atlas beside him. The fields were quiet, and the warm light touched the trees surrounding the cottage. Daniel thought about the person he had been before arriving there. He had spent years believing that moving forward meant leaving certain parts of life behind. But the journey with Atlas had taught him something different. The past was not always something to escape. Sometimes it was something waiting to help guide the future. The secret hidden beneath the land had revealed more than old belongings and forgotten records. It had revealed connections between people who believed their stories had disappeared. It had brought families together, restored memories, and reminded a community that history could still speak if someone was willing to listen. Daniel placed his hand gently on Atlas's side as the dog rested beside him. No words were necessary between them. Their bond had been built through trust, patience, and countless quiet moments. Atlas had never searched for recognition. He had simply stayed loyal, followed his instincts, and guided Daniel towards something meaningful. Looking back, Daniel realized the greatest treasure was never the hidden discovery itself. It was everything that came afterward. It was the friendships created, the memories restored, and the reminder that one faithful companion could change the direction of a person's life. The cottage remained standing among the trees, carrying the stories of those who came before and those who found their way back to it. The old rooms were filled with warmth, the walls held memories, and the land no longer felt forgotten. As another evening arrived, Daniel watched Atlas resting peacefully near the porch. He smiled, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them there. A man who thought he had lost his place in the world had found a home. A story that had been hidden for generations had finally been heard. And a loyal German shepherd had shown him that sometimes the greatest discoveries are not the secrets waiting beneath the ground, but the connections waiting to be found within our hearts.